Assalamualaikum and very good day to all of you. So today for the lecture of attribute and 3D visualization, we will continue our lecture 10 with frequency decompositions and RGB blending. So before we proceed with our lecture for today, let's take a look on the course learning outcome. So for today's lecture on the frequency decompositions, we will try to address at least two CLO, which is CLO1 and also CLO2. CLO1 is apply all type of seismic attribute to meet the purpose of subsurface data interpretation, and for this case is applying frequency decomposition as well as RGB blending. For the CL2 is more on the analyzing and interprets the results produced from the seismic attributes, which this class is frequency decomposition and RGB blending. And for the CLO3, this one will be addressed during our lab sessions, and really hope that you have the ability to present and do the lab work for especially for frequency decompositions and RGB color blending. And the objective for today's lecture is number one, at least student should be able to understand the concept of frequency decompositions and the workflow, and also the applications of these frequency decompositions. And we're going to take a look on some case study that related to frequency decomposition, what is the contribution, and lastly RGB blending, because RGB blending is quite common when we talk about the frequency decomposition or spectral decomposition. So what is frequency decomposition? So frequency decomposition or FRAC decom, or sometimes or commonly known as spectral decomposition, or in short is spec decom, is the process of separating seismic data into its frequency components. On the other hand, it is a method used to generate band limited response volume with discrete central frequency. So this method involves first decomposing the seismic data into frequency component, and this can be done using a variety of techniques such as Fourier transform or wavelet transform, and another one method that I will explain later. Once the data has been decomposed, it can be recombined, regenerate to create a band limited response volume, and this volume contain only frequencies that are relevant to the seismic interpretation problem. FRAC decom or spec decom combined with RGB blending become a powerful tool for seismic interpretations. So the picture below is a spectral of frequency of original seismic section ataupun original seismic shown in black line over here, and the blue, red, green line shows selected frequencies within the original seismic band. The selected frequency notch ataupun notches will represent a certain features, so that is why frequency decomposition is powerful tool, because we can select a certain number of frequency ataupun select notch of frequency and try to blend them, to combine them, recombine them to enhance the representations in the of the features, certain features in the seismic. So this picture here shows frequency decompositions flow from a seismic data. So normally we select three different frequency, low, mid, and high frequency, that will be colored into red, green, blue respectively. So that is why we call it as color blending, because it represents a certain color at certain frequency. Normally we do for the three different frequency only. So the result shows the combinations of this RGB color into a single cube and try to enhance the representation of certain features within the selected frequency in the seismic, like fault, channels, cars, and many more. So transform of long window approximates the spectral of wavelet. Meanwhile, short trace transform comprise wavelet overprint and local interference pattern representing acoustic properties and thickness of geologic layer. So the reason for this, that the long window will capture the entire wavelet, for example at this picture, while a short trace will only capture a portion of wavelet, a specific time window. The portion of the wavelet that is captured by the short trace will be distorted by a local interference pattern, which are caused by the acoustic properties and thickness of the particular geological layers. This different in the transform of long and short traces can be used to identify different geological features. For example, a long trace transform that shows a clear spectrum of the wavelet is likely to be from a homogeneous layer because it's quite consistent, while short trace transform shows a distorted spectrum of the wavelet is likely to be from a heterogeneous layer. Because if you can see that here we have some kind of up and down in terms of the frequencies, or in terms of the amplitude in the frequency domains. The figures below shows two different type of spectral decompositions lah, long window spectral decompositions and short window spectral decompositions. So again, long window spectral decomposition is technique that divide the seismic data into a series of long window, maybe the entire wavelet, and each window is then transformed into the frequency domain, which means that it's broken down into constituent frequency by using Fourier transform. So the frequency of the different window are then plotted, which create a spectrum of seismic data as shown here. While the short window spectral decomposition is a technique that divide the seismic data into a particular series of short windows. For example, this one from the long window, it choose or select at this particular window, and each window is then transformed into frequency domain, which means that it's broken down into its constituent or particular frequency by using Fourier transform. The frequency of the different window are then plotted, which create a spectrum of the seismic data, for example, as shown in this one. So the difference between long window spectral decompositions and short window spectral decomposition is the length of the window, as long window capture the entire wavelet while short window only capture a portion of the wavelet. So this difference in the length of the window leads to different type of spectra. And the spectrum of long window spectral decomposition will show the spectrum of the wavelet as well as the any local interference pattern that are caused by the acoustic properties and thickness of the geological pattern or geological layers. The spectrum of short windows spectral decomposition will only show the local interference pattern, as the wavelet will be distorted at a particular short window. And if you can make a comparisons between the long window spectral decomposition and short window spectral decomposition, you can see that the range of the frequency ataupun the signal of the frequency is quite stable compared to over here, because we select at a particular frequency. We want to highlight what is the frequency behavior at this particular short period of time ataupun this particular of time. Before we go in details about spectral decompositions, so let's take a look on what it actually does, meaning that its function, and what is the misconception, which is what doesn't it do actually. So the first step in spectral decompositions is the filter of the seismic data. So this is the things that the spectral decomposition is doing. So this means that the specific frequencies are removed from the data, or specific frequencies are actually emphasized. So this can be helpful for identifying different geological features in the seismic data, especially for the thin bed. Blending the envelope with RGB. Once we classify certain wavelet into different frequencies, the filtered seismic data is then blended with RGB, which is red, green, and blue colors. So this is done to make the geological features in the data more visible. So we have different set of frequency, but how we going to recombine it? By using different color. So normally we use only 3 colors and 3 different type of frequencies, because this will highlight in better way. The more color you choose, actually you increase more noises, and it's not really practical. If you remember from the first class when we talk about the color. So the color are assigned to a different frequency, so that each frequency band is represented by a different color. So this make it easier to see different geological features in the data. Showing geological features with more clarity. Yes, of course, the result of this process is a seismic data visualization that shows geological features with some clarity. This can be helpful for seismic interpreters as it can make it easier to identify and map different geological features in the subsurface. For example, spectral decomposition can be used to identify thin bed of rock, channels, and other geological features that would be difficult to see in conventional or original seismic data. And this can be helpful for seismic interpreters like you to make better decisions about resources and increase your confidence, especially for explorations and development. However, there are some misconceptions in spectral decompositions where you should take note on this, where people said that it's associated with a certain color with certain lithology. Spectral decomposition does not associate a certain color with certain lithology or hydrocarbon content. The color are used in spectral decomposition are assigned to different frequencies only, so that each frequency band represent a different color, and then we stack them, or we recombine them, and this help to highlight the different geological features in the data and make them easier to see, easier to visualize. However, the color do not have specific meaning in terms of lithology or hydrocarbon content, and it's very important to note that spectral decomposition is a very powerful tool for seismic data visualization, but it's not a replacement of traditional seismic interpretation. A seismic interpreter like you still require to use your knowledge of geology and hydrocarbon prediction or explorations to interpret the data and make informed decisions. So we're going to take a look on the spectral decompositions or frequency decomposition. Why we do the spectral decomposition? So that is the main questions. So basically we do this so that we can actually see the geology that hidden within the seismic data. It shows us a lot of geomorphology, a lot of channel shapes, carbonate reef features, information about this shape and sizes of our geology. But it can also provide information of thickness, lithology, and also pore fields. For example, if we take a look on this image, we can see an envelope volumes that been dragged on it. We can see a zone of high amplitude in red, and we also got a zone of lower amplitude, which is more of the blue-green color on these sides. So we can see we have got changes in there, but we can't really identify the geology based on the color. We can see clearly what is going on actually from this envelope. However, if we run frequency decompositions on this and create RGB blending of three of the frequency responses, the geology suddenly become a lot more apparent. Now we can see clearly we got two channels cutting across the horizons, and we can see the edge very clearly from this picture, and we can also start to see internal heterogeneity within the channel itself. So we can see the uh, tallweg coming through, and we can see lateral accretions part, and we can see point bar as well. So all in all, by looking at frequency decompositions and looking at blend of multiple magnitude volume, we can get more insight into geology that in our data. It is important to understand the different method of frequency decompositions because they all have their advantages and also the disadvantages. So there are always a trade-off between frequency resolutions and vertical resolution, and this is governed by the uncertainty principles. These are many different type of frequency decompositions, but the three that are used most commonly with seismic data are Fourier transform, continuous wavelet transform, CWT, and also matching per suite. Uh, these are the three techniques that are we are looking at today, and it is important to use the right technique for your interpretation objective. Using something like Fourier transform or continuous wavelet transform is very good if you are doing regional studies and or reconnaissance. where you are looking at large area, regional area, and you want to understand the geology and understand what is going on in on that particular region or on those area. It is also very good for identifications of gross geological features and for estimations of bed thickness, because you have a very good frequency resolution. On the other hand, something like matching pursuit based technique, where you have a good vertical resolution, and it's very good if you're doing a reservoir analysis in detail, and if you are looking to identify substance stratigraphy changes, and if you want to accurate a vertical localizations in your results, then a matching pursuit based on technique is a very good option and very good choice. So on this slide, we can see the comparisons between the method of frequency decompositions between the Fourier transform, the continuous wavelet transform, and also matching pursuit response. So we look at the different type of frequency decompositions and the effects that have on both the frequency resolutions and also the vertical resolutions. On the very left hand side, we have our original frequency spectrum and an inline showing the envelope response of the magnitude of the response. On the left, it is full frequency, so we are seeing all the frequency component, and we got a very good layering coming through. So we can see what we got to see, where we got the high amplitudes in yellow and red, and the low amplitudes in blue. So if we run the frequency decompositions on this using a Fourier transform centered around 20 Hertz, we got the 20 Hertz response. So we can see that the graph, that is very localized response at the 20 Hertz spectrum or 20 Hertz frequency. So we are looking at narrow bandwidth of data. So it is only taking part of that frequency spectrum, but because of this, it got a very poor vertical resolution. You can see in the data that there is a lot of smearing vertical, like over here. I mean smearing vertically. So we cannot see the discrete layers very clearly much or anymore. It is hard to define exactly the bottoms and the top of the base of these high amplitude layers anymore. So if we look at the continuous wavelet transform again, centered at 20 Hertz, so we have got a slightly wider bandwidth. So we got slightly less frequency resolution in general. This has given us an improved vertical resolution compared to the FT response. So the response are slightly more localized. If we take this on further into a matching pursuit, again center at 20 Hertz, like this graph, we got a much wider bandwidth now, and that gives us much better vertical resolutions compared to the CWT and FT. So the layers are more distinct again, and we can see clearly where the top and the base of each event, each layer is. But our bandwidth is much wider, so we are looking at more of a frequency spectrum, and there's less frequency resolutions. So depending on whether frequency resolution is important or vertical localization is important, you use the appropriate technique for your interpretations, objective, and what is your target is. So these are the workflows of doing the spectral decompositions. We always start with 3D seismic volume. So the first step is to load the seismic volume into the seismic interpretation software like Petrel, Poloscan, and so on. And second, we're going to interpret the horizons. Okay, the next step is to interpret the seismic volume to identify an interpreted horizon. So this horizon will be used to create a 3D subvolume over here. So when we have multiple horizons, a particular horizon, stop of formations, the 3D subvolume is created by extracting the seismic data that is associated with the interpreted horizon that we has been conducted before. And then tuning cube frequency. The tuning cube is a 3D volume that contains the frequencies response of the 3D subvolumes. So the frequency response is calculated by applying the Fourier transform to the seismic data in the 3D subvolume. And from the 3D seismic volume also we can compute into different frequencies, into different discrete frequencies volume. And the discrete frequencies volume is a 3D volume that contains the frequency response of the 3D subvolume at a discrete frequency. Okay, and the discrete frequency volume is created by slicing the tuning cube at a specific frequency. And later after that, we do the time slicings, time structure map by looking at the cross section view. And this is we also do the plan horizontal view, meaning that from the top view. And we view all the frequency. For this case, we always use the three frequency: the low, the middle, and also the high frequency. And we view all this frequency first, and then after we have some understandings on the changes of the frequency, the changes of features based on the different frequency, we do the blending frequency, where we will set the red, green, and blue for this particular frequency respectively. For normally frequency, low frequency is red, middle frequency is green, and high frequency is in blue color. So when we do frequency decompositions, we usually decompose it into multiple bands and not just one. So we can look at differences between the different frequency bands, and this will start to reveal different parts of the informations. Here we have three frequency response, 30 Hz, 40 Hz, and also 50 Hz. So we can see that there are subtle difference between them. These are all coming out from the same input data, but they are just looking at different parts of the spectrum of frequency. So at the moment, if we view them individually, we have to compare them to look at how the image changes or changing, and then make inference from that, which can be quite a time-consuming process. So it is much easier if we combine them together into one volume. And we do this using RGB blending or RGB blend, so that 30 Hz response goes into red channels, the 40 Hz response goes into green channels, and 50 Hz response goes into the blue channel. When we do this, we get a blend that shows show us a contribution from all these three volume. So we have got area of white, we got a strong high amplitude response in all three volumes. Where we have got black, we got a low amplitude response in all three volumes. And where one coloring is dominating, then the frequency is the one that is dominated. So what we can see here quite clearly, it is a geometric of the three channels and the force cutting, uh, cross cutting channels. So they are coming out really nicely at this area, as well as the internal heterogeneity in them. But we can also see the background, particularly on the right hand side. So the background color is changing from blue up in the north, and more brownish red down toward the south. So this means that down in the southern area, we got a greater contributions from our lower frequencies. So this could be indicating thickening of our sequence and our reflector as we go down to the south. So this is a powerful way to visualize the different frequencies, the frequency band in the seismic data. It can help us to identify different geological features, and so to understand the structures of the subsurface. So if we zoom in on the top of those channel again, we can see that the different phases that we saw earlier that are being highlighted by the different frequency characteristics. So the different colors are showing up those different phases. So we can see the Talweg is more of a blue color, and the point bar are more of a reddish brown color. So what we can see on the left hand side with the channels on the left is that the colors are more variable. There are more changes within the channel, and that indicates heterogeneity within. There may be changes in thickness, or it could be changes in the lithology in the particular channel system. But it is important that we don't just look at the RGB blend and leave it there. There are tools available in the current software that allow us to interpret directly based on the RGB blend itself, and to extract it out adaptive geobodies that shows us at least the morphology of the channel. So we can get a 3D interpreted object of those channel features. From that we can get volumetrics. So we can also do faces classification directly from the RGB blend. So we can start to interrogate the geophysics a bit more, look at the variability of the classes, of variability of the frequency response, and start pulling out the individual phases based on the seismic responses. So next, we are going to take a look on the application of frequency decompositions or spectral decompositions and RGB blending. So the applications of frequency decompositions or spectral decompositions and RGB blending can be conducted starting from exploration stage until development stage. So most commonly is for geological reconnaissance, phasis definition, thickness estimation. So these three are quite common for exploration and appraisal. And move into a further details study for development and production is heterogeneity and also reservoir compartmentalizations. Geological reconnaissance frequency view composition and RGB blendings are applicable and commonly being used at all stages of the interpretation and cycle through explorations, appraisal, development, and also production. So now I'm going to show you a couple of case study which show some of the ways in which you can use frequency to aid your understanding and to help your interpretation. So for the first case study is looking at geological reconnaissance. So if you have a new area that you are looking at, you have a large data set and you want to know what's going on in there, frequency decompositions and RGB blending is a good way of revealing the geology and showing you what's going on. So we have an RGB cube here, and we are looking at the time slice just through the middle of the cube. So this is about 1,000 square kilometer, and I'm just showing you uh, some of the features that we can see in the data sets. So in the bottom right hand side here, we have another complex channel system. Again, quite easily we can see meandering loops, and we can see area of lateral accretions, and we can see splays coming in, and we can also see a scallop edge towards the bottom, indicating slumping that we have got coming down in those zones. Next, if we move to the center of the image, you can see that we got some strong faults coming through. Some of these are large fault, and other are full apart zones where we have an abrupt change in frequency response. That's where we have the big through across the faults. So we can see the layering coming down between the faults. So which is where we have the relay ramps coming down. So these are heading from north to south and down towards the bottom of the image. We got hostile faulting coming through associated with those main pull apart fault. Next, and then further on the left hand side, we can see this zone of low altitude chaotic response. So these are volcanic diapers, and we can start to see the shape and extent of them. So we can see where these two diapers are getting quite close together and may connect at other layers in the volume. So we can also see radial faults that are coming out from this uplift. The next examples I'd like to show you is how we can use frequency decompositions or spectral decompositions when we are looking at a stack channel to look at the exact depositions layering of the system. Quite often we will have a overlaying channel system, and we need to identify exactly where one channel is and where the other one start below it. So in this example, we have the RGB blends from two different techniques, the Fourier transform on the left and the matching pursuit techniques on the right. So in the Fourier transform on the left, we can see a nice green channel coming through from sort of north to southeast. But when we look at the matching pursuit response, we don't see it there. It doesn't seem to be picking it up. So this back to the questions why we can't see it. Well, if we shift the horizons up by 30 milliseconds and look at the interval just above it, that channel now appears in the matching pursuit response. So this is because we are seeing it in its true depositional positions. With the matching pursuit, we have a very good vertical resolution, and we are seeing that that channel is existing 30 milliseconds above the horizons. So when you shift the horizons down to its true positions, the channel is no longer there. The Fourier transform technique is smearing vertically, so we are getting an image of that channel over a much greater time window than it truly exists. Um, Next, this can be seen when we look at the vertical sections through the tube lens. So the horizons on the vertical section is that shifted point, so 30 milliseconds above its true positions. So we can see vertical smearing that we have on the left hand side on the Fourier transform, whereas in the matching pursuit one we have distinct layer and we can see much better vertical localizations. And that is our channel system, and that is inside the circle, very tightly constrained. So the third example that I would like to show you is how we can use frequency to estimate thickness. So this is where a technique like a Fourier transform really helps us, because you get a very good frequency resolutions. If we look at the simple wedge model here, we can see that the difference in the RGB blends of the Fourier transform, CWT, and also matching pursuit. So with the Fourier transform, we can we can get a nice rainbow color on the different on different thicknesses of the wedge. So this is due to the destructive and constructive interference that you get between the different frequency. So with the matching pursuit based technique, you you get you get a very distinct top and base surface of the wedges, and those are defined all the way right up to the tuning point and the right hand side. This gives us a good vertical resolution, but it means that we can't really use matching pursuit very well for estimating thickness. So the Fourier transform result give us this range of color, so we can start to look at thicknesses. So this is illustrated here, where we have an RGB blend of a submarine fan system on the right hand side, and we have a wedge model with decomposition that matches the one that we run on the seismics. So at our well location over here, we know that the send is 84 milliseconds, so we can use that to calibrate our wedge, and we can look and compare the color that we are getting in the seismic with with what we are seeing in on the wedge. So once we got our wedge calibrated and we know that the color represents 84 milliseconds, we can start look at the other areas of the fan and bit of their thickness. So we can see that the thickness of the channels, which is coming in the blue color, is giving us a response of 110 milliseconds according to the wedge model. So using a Fourier transform technique or continuous wavelet transform techniques, we can start to estimate bed thicknesses from our seismic data. So finally, I want to look at reservoir compartmentalizations and how these techniques can be used to look at lateral variability within your reservoir. So this is very, very good in development situations when you are trying to produce from your reservoir, that you want to understand any kind of buffers that you may have, or any factor affecting fluids flow. So what we have here is the Sky Barrow Reservoir from the northwest shelf of Australia. So we can see on the left hand side an envelope volume where we can see this nice high amplitude response that corresponds to our reservoir. If we look at the RGB blend of the same reservoir, we can see a lot more details and a lot more color variations coming through across the reservoir. So we can see very clearly that we have got a cross-cutting channel coming from here in blue, and we can also see faults that are clearly visible, not only the dark north-south faults, but also very subtle east-west fault down to on the left-hand side near to the tip of the reservoir. So we can also see lateral variation in color, areas of more pinker color, area of more oranges, area of more greens. So these are showing us lateral variations in the frequency response, and that could be changes in thickness of the reservoir, or it could be changes in the pore fields or lithology. So to summarize of what we have learned for today's lecture is, number one, frequency decompositions and RGB blending can reveal a lot more geology than just looking at a single amplitude volume on its own. So it allows us to see the geomorphology as well as seeing detailed facies information. And it is very effective at reconnaissance for identifying stacked channel system, but also for estimating bed thickness and identifying reservoir compartmentalizations. However, it is very important that you use the right technique for your interpretations objective, depending on whether you're looking for frequency resolutions or vertical resolutions. And finally, it is important not to just look at the blends, but to actually use them as a basis for your interpretations. So interpret directly on the blends once you have your geology revealed to you, meaning that you need to have a prior geological knowledge before you do the blends interpretations, and then you can take that on for further analysis into the geophysics and looking at the detail change that you are getting within the features that you have identified. So that's all for frequency decompositions or spectral decompositions lecture. So again, thank you for your attention, and I really hope that you can get something from this lecture. Please be informed that the materials of this lecture mostly are from other parties, the third parties. Especially I took very much from EAGEE lecture. So please get their permission if you are willing to post some things that related to their materials. So with that, I really hope that you enjoy the lecture, and I really wish have for a good day ahead, and have a nice day ahead. Again, thank you very much for your attention, and goodbye.